So President Ilves, I'm going to start with you. As recently as 2 decades ago, Estonia sat behind the Iron Curtain, cut off from the world, cut off from information. How is it that you've managed to transform this country in such a fast way into what is now known as Estonia? And what exactly is Estonia, and what is it in your background that led you to do what no other what no other leader in Eastern Europe has done?
Well, like many other countries that came out of totalitarian communist rule, 50 years of backwardness were kind of the norm, well, we had to figure some way of getting out of it, and it was quite clear that building the infrastructure in society, or physical infrastructure that hadn't been built in 50 years would take us many, many years. But we became independent in 91 and 93. Mosaic came around. We saw that there was, the entire world was playing on a level playing field. Well, then we decided to move ahead and see if we could do something there. I was influenced by 2 things. One was that I read Jeremy Rifkin's The End of Work, which was this kind of neo-Marxist Luddite text saying that the more you computerize, the fewer jobs there will be. And one example was of a Kentucky steel mill that employed 12,000 people. And then it was bought by the Japanese and automatized and computerized, and then they produced exactly the same amount of steel with 120 persons, which would probably be depressing for most people, but if you're as small as we are, I thought this was the way to increase our functional size, and so we should computerize. And the other one was I was not afraid of computers personally, just because I had the amazing luck of being taught to program at 13, so I said, okay, well, why don't we put these 2 together and start teaching programming schools. That means you have to put the schools online. It means you have to by 97, all schools were online. All children had access to computers. So that was the beginning of it. But there's one of these nudges that gets an avalanche going because as a result, the whole sort of people started thinking in these terms. And I'd say that most of the work has been done by a lot of people tend to be younger, but who actually sees the opportunity to excel at something that otherwise a poor East European that facing all the kind of prejudices that poor East Europeans do face would not be able to overcome. And so we came up with a whole bunch of innovative solutions that work, and now people copy us.
Do you have a favorite?
Well, it's hard to say because one of the things, what I would say my favorite is actually the structure of the system that we designed, which is which again came out of our poverty. I think we have one of the most robust and secure systems anywhere because all government and private sector transactions basically can be carried out over it's maybe technical, but a 2-factor binary key code or PKI system, which means that very secure identity. And on top of that, what came out of our poverty in somewhere around 2000, when we wanted to create our cloud, we realized we didn't have enough money to buy all the servers. So instead, we came up with an architecture which has turned out to be the most robust and secure, which is, if you really know this stuff, is a enterprise service bus, which basically allows us to keep our transactions very secure and also allay fears of Big Brother.
Now, President Ilves, I'm going to come back to you on some of the backlash and some of the challenges that you faced on this journey. But Prime Minister Aziz, I want to turn to you for a moment. You were Prime Minister of a country that many would describe as the most dangerous place on Earth with nuclear weapons. You and I can argue about it, but there are people who say this. There have been 19 prime ministers in Pakistan, of which you're the only one who finished your term. The other 18 were either killed in office, ended up in handcuffs, were forced to resign, fled the country, or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I calculated, before this session, I calculated what the odds are of a prime minister finishing his or her term. It's 5.2%. So you truly define beating the odds. Now, you've certainly had an incredible journey along the way in the sense that not only did you complete your term, Pakistan thrived economically, educationally, and financially during your tenure. So what is the secret? I mean, it's not just about finishing your term. You were able to juggle so many different priorities. What were they, and how did you do it?
Thank you for a very easy question. I'll just answer it in 2 words, and then I can explain them in a second. And I'm serious. One is you believe in destiny, and 2, you believe in divinity. Destiny is what you're destined to do. Some people call it luck. Some people say you create your own space in the world. And divinity is the supreme power, no matter which faith you follow, which will then guide you, protect you, and lead you to where you want to go. Having said that, I think the reason we did well is, one, things were so bad that you could only go up. Let's be very frank. Secondly, when I walked in, the country was technically without reserves. We had $450 million of cash in the bank, $750 million of unpaid bills. So you know what that means. So that was an opportunity. In adversity is opportunity. So rather than run away and get scared, we said, let's see what we can do. I had no experience in government, as you know. I was for 30 years before that in a bank all my life. So I was hired in first as finance minister, and then I fought the election and became the prime minister. The prime minister has to be elected in Pakistan. You can't be appointed. And under the constitution, the prime minister is the chief executive of the country. So having said all this, we approached it like any other situation. What are the key challenges? What are the 2 or 3 things we need to focus on immediately? Security, economy, governance. These were the 3 I chose. Security was much more complex than we thought, because the environment around us is changing. You see, a country like Pakistan, for those of you who don't know, is close to 200 million people. Its neighbors are Iran, Afghanistan, China, India, and the Middle East, because the sea boundaries connect with each other. So you've got many exciting countries around you. China, too. Did I mention China? Yeah, okay. So you have all these countries. Then there are a lot of fault lines in the region and in the country. So every problem you could think of did occur. But the first thing I focused on is to fix the economy, and then we'll have enough resources to fight the security issues and fight the other, and build for growth and give our people a better life. So basically, in 6 years, we doubled our GDP. Per capita income doubled. We started a reform agenda, which was very all-encompassing. I don't want to bore you with details. But the message to take away from all this is, if you have conviction, if you have integrity, and if you work hard, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, for 8 years in government, I did not have 1 day off. There was no vacation, no day off, because things are happening every day. At night, when I get the security reports, they tell me this happened, that happened. You give instructions, next day something new happens. So 8 years, and how could we do it? It's love for your country. I gave up a career which was very lucrative at Citibank. I can mention that. It's not a commercial for Citibank. And if you get an opportunity to serve your motherland, this is the best gift anybody can give you. That's the motivation I went with. So you need motivation, you need competence, you need integrity, and the ability to lead and build a team, because you can't do everything. And last but not least, prioritize. If you try to do 52 things, nothing will get done. So you do have to decide what you go at first. You have to decide what you don't touch at the moment. And then you have to execute with competent people and give them a clear sense of direction. All that sort of worked out. There are many things which didn't work out. Some did. Net, we did all right. And I think the ultimate test was as I mentioned, the poverty reduced. We were a country with, it's a huge country. 200 million, nuclear power, exciting part of the world. Every issue in the world is there for you. So it was a challenge. But I can look anybody in the eye and say we did our best, and we are proud of what we did. Thank you.
Lindiwe, let me bring you in now. Your story is extraordinary. You must have been 14 years old when apartheid ended in South Africa. You are now leading the opposition party that is challenging many of the most well-known figures who brought down apartheid, and you're doing so against a backdrop of people discriminating against you for your age, your gender, and some horrific racist comments from all communities in South Africa that you've commented on publicly. Now, you and I are close enough in age that I think I can credibly observe that this isn't that sort of usual for somebody who's 33 to be leading such a global charge against corruption, against crime in the face of so much adversity. What is it that drives you? What is it that makes you so passionate about this, that drives you forward?
There's something about being a young leader that means that you are already possessed of a certain level of optimism. Sometimes it's naive optimism. And sometimes it's a willingness to take risks where other people are not willing to take risks. I first ran for office as parliamentary leader of the opposition in Parliament a year and a half ago in 2011. I was 31 years old at the time. I'm single, I'm not married, I have no children. And in my political context, as a single, childless, young, female politician, there was an enormous amount of pushback against me, questions about whether or not people would respect me, whether I could lead a caucus of MPs most of whom were twice my age, whether or not I had the gravitas to do the job effectively. And it took a certain amount of that chutzpah, that naivety, that optimism that comes with being young for me to say, well, actually, there is a large rump of young South Africans, 2/3 of the population is under the age of 35, who are just like me, who identify with the things I identify with, who don't have a voice in South African politics because South Africa's political discourse is dominated by older leaders, leaders who are sometimes 1 and 2 generations ahead of the average age, which is 25. And it felt as though there was a dearth of voices speaking on behalf of these young people, particularly since we've got an election coming up, a general election next year, where for the first time there will be new voters who will be registering to vote for the first time who've never lived under apartheid before. And yet the rhetoric that comes out of politics and government at the moment, even from some young leaders, is always about the past, it's always about apartheid, it's always about scratching at our country's wounds. And it's never about looking forward and offering hope and a vision and a plan to govern the country effectively. So I thought I could capture some of that. And it's what keeps me grounded. It's what convinces me that I'm doing the right thing. I have been called so many disgusting things in my time in politics, which I won't repeat in polite company. But there's an overwhelming number of people who are positive about South Africa, who are excited about the emergence of an alternative government, are excited about my party because it is a young, modern, forward-looking party with a mixed generation of leaders, and who are immensely supportive of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So on balance, I have enough to guide me forward, to not take the criticism to heart.
But it's easy to listen to all three of you and sort of forget that there's a real backlash that comes with the courage that you're all demonstrating. So, Lindiwe, let me come back to you and say it is not innate in most people to have thick skin. It is not easy. So you've whether it's natural or whether it's something you've worked on, I think what our audience wants to know is, how does somebody so fresh in politics, who's so young and pushing the envelope so far, how do you withstand a constant barrage of critique? What is the lesson for all those young people out there who want to follow in your footsteps?
Well, first of all, you can't enter politics and not expect to be criticized. It's part and parcel of the job, and it's something you learn from the day you hit the ground running. The moment you're elected into high office, whether it's an ordinary MP or an elected official in any other part of government, you have to accept the fact that you become an open book because you're offering an alternative view or a view of some kind which invites people to comment on you and to make remarks about what you look like or where you come from or your accent or goodness knows what else. So that's part and parcel of politics. But the key is not to believe that people who've never met you before know anything about you or what motivates you. And not to believe that when you are lying awake at night, you don't know who you are and what it is you're doing, and that some commentator for some newspaper somewhere or a cheeky jock on a radio station knows more about what it is you're trying to do than you do. And if you hang on to that, and if you acknowledge that nobody who criticizes you is doing so out of pure objectivity, it's got something to do with their own issues as well, it becomes easier to keep your center and navigate your way through some of the really intense mudslinging that takes place in politics. What I also take comfort from is the fact that people criticizing me makes what I do relevant. It means I'm some kind of a credible threat. And that is encouraging for me. So I've developed a kind of a bloodlust, an appetite for politics, which you have to have in opposition. You have to be ready to roll up your fists and have a little bit of a fight. And because it's a sign of relevance, it's a sign of growth, it's a sign of credibility, and it's a sign that you are rubbing people up the wrong way who would have you simply be docile and quiet and be kept in a small corner and not pose a credible threat.
So next year you come back to Zeitgeist and you teach a course on this for all of us, okay? President Elvis, let me turn to you. What Lindiwe talked about was a verbal backlash, which I'm sure as president of a country and a world leader you've certainly experienced. But the backlash that you've experienced in driving Estonia into the wired world takes on a different form, which is a cyber attack from your much larger neighbor, Russia, in 2007. Talk to us about what happened, what you learned, and the resilience of the Estonian state under your leadership.
Well, start off, I think that, let's put it this way, that especially at that time, there are many countries that could experience a cyber attack and no one would have noticed. So, in fact, it does presume a certain level of a rather high level, actually, of IT use in a society for it to have an effect. We were fairly well prepared because we had before the attack, 2 months before the attack, we had our first online elections. You can do that in Estonia, and we just had our third last year, where you vote online.
How many people vote online?
25%. Which means you can vote all over the world. I mean, it's again a function of the architecture we've developed. So we figured that every geek in the world would want to hack into our election, and so we gamed it. And as a result of gaming and attack on the election, we then developed all kinds of connections with people around Europe on what to do if this happens or that happens. So when we were attacked, we were in fact immobilized. We at first didn't know what was going on. But we came through it fairly well, and then I would say whoever did it, we have our sort of ideas about who did it. Nonetheless, it was an own goal, because before that we'd been trying to convince NATO that, as NATO allies, that well, this is a new threat and we have to deal with this, and if you don't deal with this, we will be blindsided one day. And they kept putting us off, saying no, this is nothing. And then we were hit, and then they said, okay, and we'll put the NATO Cyber Center in Estonia. So, in fact, if there had been no attack, it wouldn't be there. So we came out fairly well from it, and I would say that one of the other things we learned was actually the system that we have devised in Estonia was not compromised in any way, because what we got were DDoS attacks. You actually had a very good metaphor for that a while back about having a party with 7-year-olds or whatever, 3-year-olds, where you invited 12, but suddenly 2,000 descend upon your party. That's more or less what happens in a DDoS attack. You overload servers. And the interesting part about that, which relates also to what Mr. Goodman was saying, is that these generally tend to be attacks that represent a collusion between illegal organized crime organizations and governments, a unique form of public-private partnership, I would add these days, and which is very, very widespread these days. It's really quite horrific to see how much. It goes back to kind of like the Barbary pirates who would rob ships in the Mediterranean with the tacit agreement, if not the permission, of the Ottoman Empire. And we're seeing the same kind of thing today.
So from a verbal backlash to a state-sponsored or public-private partnership cyber backlash, Prime Minister Aziz, let's turn to you because you experienced, I mean, there's a number of backlashes you experienced that we can talk about.
They're still going on.
And they're still going on. But there's one that I want to talk about in particular, which I know is sensitive, but had a profound impact on you. Shortly after you became Prime Minister, a suicide bomber attacked your convoy, blew up several of the cars, killed your bodyguard. I believe you were slightly injured. Can you share that experience with us and then help us understand when that happens, how do you wake up the next day and still do everything that you're doing? I would be going fetal and running away.
I don't think I want to go into too much detail. I don't want to spoil your day. But it was a traumatic experience. And had it not been for one of my security officers to push me into the car and say, get in, this was an election rally. I was in the campaign to be prime minister, so euphoria is high. And when I finished the rally, I was shaking hands with people and trying to be warm and friendly. And these people, our security people, pushed me in. As soon as the door closed, the car had moved 2 feet, and there were 2 suicide bombers actually, as we later discovered. One exploded and damaged the car. My driver died. A lot of people died around me. Actually, I didn't even get a scratch. This is a miracle, but that's what happened. The car was armored to the nth degree, so that helped protect us. However, the people who planned this were very professional. They had 2 bombers, so they wanted to disable the car. We would get out and go into car number 2. And in that process, the second bomber was supposed to explode. The reason I'm sitting here is the second bomber chickened out, and when he saw his partner explode all over the place and or disappear in front of him, he chickened out and ran away. So that's what happened. I think at that time, you feel very courageous and bold, and all your system generates tremendous courage. And I told my security people I want to see the rest of my detail, what happened to them, my security people. There are lots of them. They just pushed me into another car and took me away correctly. But next morning, or that night when you go to sleep, it's tough. But it really strengthens you as a person. I don't wish this on anybody. There are other ways to strengthen one. And it took a while to get over it. Having said that, at the end of the day, life goes on, and you really believe in your destiny. So you have to do what you have to do. So I was back to normal the next day, but not mentally. It took a while, to be honest. And life became much more complicated after that. As a result of all this, or maybe otherwise, I won the election. I got elected, and I became prime minister. So I think these experiences in life, I don't wish them on anybody, but they make you a stronger person. And if you have the determination and the grit and the courage to face these things, you really can benefit from it. The sympathy factor lasts a few days. The criticism and all the other things. I had one extra disadvantage. They said, who is this guy who's parachuted in? In fact, the people who tried to kill me, their logic was, he's an agent of the United States of America, sent by President Bush. This is, before they explode, they record a video, the suicide bombers. So they said, we are going to kill Mr. So-and-so. He is an agent of the United States. George Bush has sent him to become prime minister. We will kill him before he becomes prime minister. So America doesn't start influencing our policy. This was not true at all. At that time, I'd never even met Mr. Bush. I knew who he is, of course, but I didn't know him. But the point is, this is how they motivate people. And last thing I would say is that extremism, terrorism, is not a result of one faction against the other. On a serious note, this is a worldwide problem, and it is based on deprivation. A feeling of deprivation in the people. It has nothing to do with religion. Many people say, this is for this religion, Islam, for example. Nothing is further from the truth. Deprivation can be defined in many ways. Lack of income, lack of justice, lack of resolution of disputes, lack of a voice, lack of so many things which basic as human beings we deserve. When you deny that, certain people will go to the extreme. And that's why you create movements of so-called terrorism. And if you can address these causes of deprivation, that is the way to win the hearts and minds of these people. They are human too. The battle against terrorism is not a battle of security and army and police alone. That is one factor. But the real factor is communicating with them, getting share of mind and telling them, look, this is what we are trying to do. This is how your future will be better and your coming generations will be better. And it doesn't work that way because a lot of these people are used, exploited. The person who blew up next to my car, this particular one, was from a very poor family and was recruited in a place of worship by professional recruiters and converted, and he did what he did. So I think there's a lesson for all of us to reflect on, that we must find ways to fight deprivation, give justice to all, give opportunity to all. And if that is given, this sounds idealistic, but to the extent you can be seen to be moving in this direction, we'll have a more peaceful world.
Well, and this brings me to my next question, which is about corruption specifically, because corruption has an opportunity cost that impacts entire populations. And out of all of the challenges in the world, the one that I hear and read about, the three of you talking about the most, is we have to tackle corruption. We have to find a way to address it. So I have two questions, and any of you jump in. What is it about corruption that stands above all the other issues that's making even you, Prime Minister Aziz, continue fighting this post-office and President Ilves and Lindiwe in your current roles? And then the second is your three countries represent, well, President Ilves, in your case, one of the most connected countries on earth. Prime Minister Aziz and Lindiwe, in your case, is two of the fastest connecting nations on earth. How will increased connectivity impact our ability to tackle corruption? Who wants to go first? Lindiwe.
I spoke earlier about how young the South African population is, 2/3 under the age of 35. We've also got a staggering unemployment problem in South Africa that is on the rise. It's at 37% as we sit here today. And 2/3 of that 37% are young people, also under the age of 35. So we have a system in which young people are not being given adequate educational opportunities. They're entering the formal economy with no ability to either get tertiary education or start work. And the ranks of the unemployed are swelling on a daily basis. And there's quite a lot of moody talk in South Africa about the threat of a youth uprising, about a ticking time bomb, about young people being disillusioned with their government, with their prospects for the future, and becoming ever more desperate. And one of the things that drives what I do every day is the concern and the fear that there are populists, and it's a very worrying part of politics on my continent, in Africa. There are populists who are always ready to exploit that kind of disenfranchisement amongst young people and use it for nefarious ends, to drive divisions, racial divisions, divisions between different nationalities and so forth. And in addition to that, that inequality, when those young people see the political leaders who are supposed to be representing them driving around in flashy cars and having access to contracts and tenders, using the public purse as their own personal piggy bank, the frustration grows and it festers and the sentiment rises, and the possibility of that youth uprising becomes ever more stark. So it's something that's at the front of mind of a lot of South Africans, and we all have different solutions to it. In my case, the solution is that we need a government that can offer an alternative, that can offer a clean governance model, that can show that all governments aren't corrupt and all politicians aren't malicious, and that it's possible for the state to intervene in the economy enough to drive economic growth, to enable more and more people to get a quality level of education that'll pull them into the formal economy and give them real opportunities. And that's what we're doing in the regional governments that we have all over the country. But we have to capture those young people, we have to capture their imagination, and we have to do it soon. Because if we don't, the combination of the inequality and the rise of corruption, which makes them feel locked out of the system, and the potential for demagogues to come and abuse that sentiment, it rises with every passing day.
President Ilves?
I just say put all government expenditures online. I mean, Estonia, despite the sort of 20-year sort of prejudiced view of East Europeans being like backward and corrupt, we're less corrupt. We're the better side of of the EU. And in fact, every country that is going through a financial crisis in the Eurozone today has a Transparency International corruption rating that is worse than ours. But we're one of the good countries. One reason, and I would argue this is really a core issue, is transparency. I mean, basically what governments buy. You have tenders that are open and online. You have, I mean, the more openness you have, the more difficult it is to be corrupt. I sum it up by saying, well, the other thing is, which is that you put as many decisions, especially entitlements or non-discretionary decisions, online, meaning they happen automatically. I mean, if you have a right to get something, you just sort of log on and you get it. There's no bureaucrat or no series of bureaucrats whose palms you have to grease to get what you deserve anyway. So again, I say you can't bribe a computer. The more interneted your society is with openness, that is to say you put everything online, then the less corruption. Of course, I mean, it can be personally nasty. I mean, we had this like 1990 rug in the office that was worn out. We bought a new one. It was put online. It cost 5,000 euros. And, for a week I took hell because I bought a new rug. But I mean, okay, that's too bad that I had to take hell for that. But I mean, the point is that the more that is public and inspectable. I mean, it's not that everyone's going to look at everything, but there's always the issue that, well, they can look at this, they can look at that. All our expenditures are online, and that is all. That can be inspected at any time, and journalists sort of sit there and spend their time poring over records, and well, that's what I mean, transparency for me is what allows us to be far less corrupt than a lot of old European democracies that, of course, feel much haughtily superior to these poor little East European countries. But if you actually look at the record, it really is transparency that is the key issue.
Prime Minister Aziz, you once told me that your life's work post-office is dedicated to tackling corruption. I know you're on the board of Transparency International. So I want to hear your perspective on this, but I also, in response to what President Ilves said, could this work in a country of 200 million people?
Yes and no. I think this, whatever the president said, is quite applicable, but the way you do it may be different for a country which is as huge as mine. I'm just a supporter of Transparency International, have been. I'm not on the board. But,
I promoted you.
Yeah, you promoted me. But let me just add to what has been said. First of all, I think corruption manifests itself in many forms across the world. Let's look at government corruption for a second, then we can go to other types of corruption very quickly. For fighting corruption in government, clearly having transparency is key. Having a free, responsible media, press, is also very important. A functioning parliament is very important. So they can ask the questions, committees, hearings, all that. That brings out transparency. But again, the fundamental way, at least what we found, is to change the policy from getting approvals from government on everything to liberalize, privatize, and deregulate. The more you remove these areas of potential corruption, the better it is. So transparency is good, but you have to attack the fundamental policies. I'll give you one quick example. Telephone systems. Pakistan started on cellular phones. When I was born as a kid, our phone was locked in a wooden box with a lock. That was the type of, this is old days, because it was considered really a perk which you couldn't use as a normal person. So we decided when I entered the government that let's open up the country and push mobile phones. So what did we do? We auctioned the bandwidth. Long story short, we had a tender live on TV, pre-qualified bidders, and I was expecting $10, $20 million per license. We got about $150 million per license or something like that. And it was all on TV. The whole nation watched. Nobody criticized. So transparency of that. If you make examples of this, and then Pakistan, which had one of the lowest teledensities of any country in a few years became one of the most penetrated countries for telecommunications. We were doing 1 million phones a month. Of course, we have a large population. So now we are over 100 million, and I think people have more than one phone. That's one. Secondly, a very important point brought forward here is different levels of income, which in countries like ours is a real issue. So you cannot, if you are running the country or you are responsible, you can't ignore the poorest of the poor. You have to have policies which are directed to that level of this society. Then the youth. Unemployment is a key challenge. This is not the exclusive preserve of developing countries. This is now becoming a major issue in developed countries. Every country's case is different, but the leadership has to attack this on a war footing. And what works in one country may not work in another. But the more the rich-poor divide grows, you are asking for serious trouble. And it must be attacked, and attacked very effectively. Rural and urban both. Because some of our countries are rural, in Pakistan's case, 60% of the population, or actually 2/3, lives in the rural areas. And so you can't reach them as easily as the urban areas. But that leads to crime. That leads to social problems. That leads to all sorts of issues which we face every day. So I think this is a very large, multifaceted challenge which has to be attacked in that context. And you cannot just do one initiative and say we've solved the problem, because this is a dynamic thing. And as a leader, as a government, you have to be in touch. You have to know where the potential problems are. You can't remove poverty overnight. This is something which stays there to some extent. There's a rich-poor divide, but you can reduce it. And that is easier said than done. So you need macro policies, you need micro policies, and transparency, free media, free parliament, free political process, so the thing comes out. And if you do examples of like auctioning bandwidth live in front of everybody, you know why I did that? I asked my people, what did we charge the previous phone systems we gave licenses to? Silence. Because obviously you can guess what happened. That's why I said, let's do this. And the government made a lot of money, plus it was all in the open. If you can bid higher, come and take it. It's a scarce resource. So.
President Elvis, you wanted to jump in.
I was say that, having just read a book by Jared and Schmidt, Cohen and Schmidt, sorry, that actually, I mean, your book, in fact, focused on sort of the transformative power to get to sort of liberal democracy. But I would argue that IT and its sophisticated applications really are the great equalizer, like the Colt 45 150 years ago, but it is the great equalizer in terms of jumping ahead, staying behind the old categories, sort of economies of scale versus economies too small, how rapidly a society can work, its level of health care, all of those things in a case of sort of sophisticated use of IT can be dramatically changed. And what we are doing right now, I mean, we are a big foreign aid donor, my little country, because we give our open source, non-proprietary software for government, for operating governments away. That's our foreign aid. And right now we're giving it to Afghanistan, Afghanistan where there are 200,000 people online, 200,000 people with fixed line phones, but there are 20 million people with mobile phones. And if you have a mobile phone application that allows you to do all the e-government services, you're way ahead compared to where it would have been otherwise. And now our additional foreign aid, if this works out, will be that we will in fact do all the computational side in Estonia, which of course is possible. It doesn't matter whether it's in Kabul or in Tallinn. We will do that until they get their own infrastructure there to do that. Now, these are things that completely switch around the way things have been done up to now with, the UNDP giving money and USAID giving money. No, you can give actually, we are providing the software of development to countries, and since it's non-proprietary, open source, we're saying, here, take this, do what you want. And this, I think, will have profound effects, and it's a completely different situation from where the World Bank would give billions of dollars to build a dam or something. This does not require money; it requires brains, and then empower people to do things. So I think that the world is changing, and once you get beyond the revolution, the real question is how do you get from the revolution to a successful modern country?
And President Novus, when I listen to you, what I realize is we're all familiar with the responsibility that physical world superpowers have to address the world's challenges. But what we learn from Estonia, 1.3 million people, a country that is a cyber power, there's also a responsibility that comes with that. We are out of time, but I have to ask each of you one question that humanizes you a little bit for the audience. What are you afraid of? Lindiwe, let's start with you.
I've spent the whole day thinking about this because, I'm here to talk about being terribly courageous. And I don't view myself as courageous. I believe, what Prime Minister Aziz has been through requires courage. I believe what's happening in Estonia requires innovation and courage. I am simply a political voice in a democracy that's still functional. So I struggle to think about what it is that makes me courageous, and on the flip side, what it is that terrifies me. I'm obviously afraid of South Africa not succeeding. I'm afraid that all the immense potential that our country has could be squandered away by fear, by discord, by racism, by sexism, by all of the ghosts of our past. And I'm afraid that we might not be able to reach our potential, but I don't have personal fears. I wake up in the morning, I feel quite confident as a person. I go out into the world and I do what I believe in. It's a great privilege. So I don't mean to come across as though I'm some kind of, fearless sort of person, but I can't actually put my finger on anything I fear except for the failure to succeed.
It's a good answer. Prime Minister Aziz, really quick, what are you afraid of?
Well, I think if you look at the world, one thing which I worry about is the whole question of leadership in the world. This is not restricted to country A, B, or C, but I'm talking worldwide. I do believe that we have lots of politicians who worry about the next election. We have very few people who are leaders and worry about the next generation. So, ladies and gentlemen, this world needs more leaders, less politicians.
President Novus, final word.
Well, personally, I'm afraid of boredom, and but for my country, it's actually fear of change. After 20 years of wanting to do things differently and better, you can see a certain sort of complacency set in, and once you lose that edge of let's try something new, then you're just stagnating at a higher level than other countries were stagnating before.
Lindiwe Mazibuko, Prime Minister Aziz, President Novus, thank you all so much.